All right, let's talk about value. I mean, have you ever really stopped to think about what makes something or someone truly valuable? Is it money? Is it power? Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating sermon from 1981 by Reverend Sun Myung Moon that asks that exact question. And his answer? Well, it suggests a universal standard that has nothing to do with what we own, but everything to do with our conscience and our ability to love. So, right out of the gate, the sermon throws this huge question at us. What's our central standard? What's the ultimate measuring stick? Is it money, knowledge, power? And this isn't just some abstract thought experiment. The text argues that the answer we choose pretty much defines, well, everything. So let's follow along on this search for a standard that's real, something that doesn't change. Okay, so before we can even begin to build a new standard, the sermon says we first have to figure out what's wrong with the one we've got. And it really boils down to this fundamental clash in how we see value. It's basically things versus people. And this is a really interesting way to frame the problem. Think about it. We treasure things like gold and diamonds, right? Why? Because they're eternal, they're unique, they're unchanging. But then you look at people. And from a purely materialistic standpoint, we're kind of the exact opposite. We're temporary, we're replaceable, and we're constantly changing. So, does that actually make us less valuable? It's a tough question. And this is the question that just cuts right through all of that. It's a gut punch to that whole materialistic standard, isn't it? It forces you to admit that deep down, you have this feeling, this knowledge, that a person, any person you love, is worth infinitely more than all the treasure in the world. So, okay, if our value doesn't come from being permanent or unchanging like a diamond, then where in the world does it come from? All right, so if looking at material things for a standard just doesn't work, where do we turn? Well, the sermon's answer is pretty direct. We need to look inward. It argues there's a real treasure that exists inside every single one of us. And that internal treasure, it's what the sermon calls the conscience. Now, here's the really cool part. The whole idea is that our conscience has the exact same qualities we admire in things like gold and diamonds. It's described as being eternal, unchanging in its purpose, and totally unique. And that, the sermon argues, is the real foundation for human value. So the crucial point here is that our conscience, according to this text, always points toward good. It's like a compass, you know? Its needle is always pointing north. Its direction never, ever changes. 1,000 years ago, today, 1,000 years from now, that pull toward what's right is presented as an absolute constant. And that's why it's argued to be the only reliable foundation for a standard of value that can actually last. Okay, but the text doesn't shy away from what it sees as a big challenge to this whole idea, the theory of evolution. I mean, if you look at it from that perspective, our conscience might just be a highly developed animal instinct, something that evolved to help us survive. If that's the case, how can it possibly be an absolute standard? The sermon's answer is to counter with a theistic view. It argues that for the conscience to be truly absolute, it has to come from an absolute source, which it identifies as God. And this, it claims, is what separates human value from everything else in the animal kingdom.
But wait, that just leads to another question, doesn't it? If the conscience is our internal standard, what standard does the conscience itself follow? I mean, what could possibly satisfy its seemingly infinite desire for what's good? This brings us to what the sermon identifies as the absolute, ultimate source of all value.
And the answer proposed is actually pretty simple: true love. The idea here is that our conscience has this infinite appetite for goodness. It's not satisfied with just a little bit. It wants to embrace the whole universe, even God. And you can't fill that kind of infinite void with finite things like money or power. The only thing that's big enough, that's infinite enough to satisfy it, according to this philosophy, is a universal true love. Yeah, this quote really sums it up perfectly. It's not just about, ticking off a list of good deeds. The ultimate journey for the conscious, from this point of view, is to be completely filled, to connect with a divine, universal love. That's the end goal. So that all sounds great, but how does it actually work in the real world? Well, the sermon lays out a pretty clear path, almost like a set of expanding circles. It all starts small, right at home, with love and service to your family. That's called filial piety. From there, it expands outward to serving your nation, which is patriotism. And then the final stage, the biggest circle, is sainthood, serving all of humanity. And the text argues that reaching that final stage is only possible when you have that connection to God. Okay, let's zoom all the way out now and look at the big picture. What is the ultimate goal?
We're going to see how this framework of conscience and love is meant to be applied on a global scale to literally transform the world.
And this is where the sermon really lays out the ultimate stakes. It's basically drawing a sharp line in the sand between two totally different worldviews. On one side, you have materialism, which it connects to communism. In that view, if consciousness is just a byproduct of matter, then human life can logically be seen as expendable. But on the other side, you have this philosophy, where value comes from something transcendent, from true love and conscience. And in that view, every single human life has absolute, undeniable worth. And all of this builds up to a pretty grand vision, the creation of what the text calls a love race. The core idea here is really powerful. It's that if all of humanity could actually unite under this one single standard of true love, with conscience as our guide, then all those old divisions, race, nation, culture, they could finally truly be overcome. And so, that leaves us with one last big question to think about. And it's not just from this sermon, it's really a question for all of us. Whether it's through this specific philosophy or a completely different one, the challenge is still out there. What does it actually take to create a universal standard for humanity, one that can truly unite us all? That's a huge question, and the search for the answer, well, that continues.